Meet Federico Grisone. An audiobook by Welter-Böller and Marion Pilipp. Speaker Marion Pilipp. Dear listeners, the idea of making the horsemanship of the old riding masters audible and spreading their knowledge with the help of modern media is our heartfelt project. We are Barbara Welter-Böller, director of a renowned school for equine physiotherapists and osteopaths, and Marion Pilipp, professional rider and Grand Prix trainer. We are connected by decades of friendship and a constant professional exchange. It is important to us to give horse lovers and riders of today a differentiated understanding of the respective riding masters. There is no such thing as the classical horsemanship. Our work should help to correctly classify the teachings in the respective temporal context. Not everything can be transferred into today's practice, and yet there are always fascinating, timeless principles and even ideas for training. The German audiobooks on classical horsemanship, published by Verlag Welter-Böller, are followed by the first English audiobook, Meet Federico Grisone. We ask for your kind indulgence regarding the pronunciation and hope you enjoy listening. Libro Primo, First Book. Looking back in time, Federico Grisone appreciates the outstanding importance of the horse for all humanity and every individual. Then he turns to the horse assessment. He writes, "The quality of the horse depends primarily on the four elements. The horse has the same character as the most powerful elements in it. One should carefully consider color and white markings and also hair vortex of the horse in order to recognize these hidden characteristics. Grayish-brown horses are assigned to element earth, for example. They are considered melancholic. Horses marked by the element of earth were lazy, clumsy and stubborn," he writes. All the details about the different fur colors and the characteristics written to them are impressive. A chestnut is not just a chestnut. Is his fur more yellowish or reminds the color of roses? Or is it looking like glowing coals? Chestnuts are assigned to the fire element, somewhat simplified. Gray horses, on the other hand, to water or air, depending on their skin tone. The earth-embossed bay horses have already been mentioned. The different graduations can cancel or increase the effect of the element, and basically all elements work in each living being. The author says that for good assessment it is necessary to know about all those effects. White markings on the legs can make a good color worthless or upgrade a bad, if not even compensate. The list of the meaning of white legs occupies several sites, and it is complicated. Classifying a horse without frequently reading the chapter is almost impossible. A horse with only 2 white handles is well drawn. And it is even better if it's got a star on its forehead. A horse with a white right front leg and a white right hind leg is called a travato horse, which is dangerous and little appreciated. Breeders can only have like this to a limited extent. Even today, discussions about colors can be very emotional. Some people say without compromises, a good horse has no color. On the other hand, are warm-blood breeders often not so happy about a filly that is spotted or looks like a pinto. But of course, there are also still breeds like the Frisian, for example, in which the color is anchored as a breeding target. German readers were obviously very interested in the element theory. From this chapter, Pfizer created an extended version. His whole book 1 is about this topic, apart from some instructions about anatomy and age determination. Colors and signs were taken very seriously in medieval times. It is considered that Empedocles founded this science in the 5th century. In the outgoing Middle Ages and also at the beginning of the Renaissance, these teachings had some kind of comeback. The Library of Alexandria had many documents about the elements and their effects. Those documents were translated to Latin and came to Europe, where the interest grew constantly. Fire, water, air, and earth were seen as the basic level of which everything consists. Each element has so-called qualities. Fire is dry and hot. Water is humid and cold. Air is warm and humid. Earth is cold and dry. Fire means courage and energy. Water, sensitivity. Air, flexibility. And earth, persistence and reliability. Science was not ready to prove theses through experiments. In ancient times, elements and their effects were assigned to different gods. After the introduction of the periodic table, physical elements were given a fixed order. Still, many people believe that there is a connection between inner values and elements. Think about astrology, Chinese medicine, and the science about temperaments. But for Federico Grisone, the right color and the right white markings were not enough as a selection criterion. The horse's anatomy, started with the quality of the hoofs, was of crucial importance to him. He wishes short pasterns, which are not too horizontal or too upright, and strong at the lower end. Big joints promote soundness and agility, especially big knees and hocks promote strength. The legs should have strong tendons and be symmetrical on both sides. He also prefers a curved neck, not too short, with a top line that is longer than the lower line of the neck. The back should be short and more or less straight with long withers. The handles and the loins should have strong muscles. It would be good if the loin muscles are slightly flatter towards the spine. The hips should be not too narrow. Besides, Grisone likes big black eyes and big nostrils. The Neapolitan horses, which were highly appreciated in the past, are considered as extinct since the 19th century. Through intensive efforts by Giuseppe Maresca, who is an enthusiastic horse breeder and excellent historical expert when it comes to Naples and the Campania region, it was possible to find a few horses of this breed. Giuseppe Maresca was incredibly helpful in translating some text passages from the original edition and supported us in our research about Federico Grisone. After many emails sent back and forth, I was absolutely fascinated by all the stories this man had to tell. I felt that I needed to visit Naples. I wanted to learn more about the Neapolitan horses, the region, and I was thrilled by the thought to see the building of the academy. Giuseppe Maresca had told me that it was still existing. In November 2019, we met in Piano di Sorrento. In the house of the Maresca family, you could easily spend years with reading in old books, studying diverse horse magazines, and admiring historic prints, paintings, and postcards. I am so grateful to have enjoyed those insights. My fantastic experience in the house was topped by a visit to the stables. The stable is not far from Giuseppe Maresca's home. Some of his own bred horses live there. From the forecourt of the building, one can see the Gulf of Naples on one side and on the other side high-rising mountains. Probably Giuseppe Maresca knows more than anyone else about the Neapolitan horses, which were once so famous. Everyone feels that this breeding is his great passion. In the end of the 13th century, King Charles gave an edict to protect the existing breeding. It prohibited crossbreeding. In the middle of the 15th century, the Spanish rulers, House of Aragon, came to power in Naples, and during that period the Spanish horses arrived there too. Various riding masters, the Duke of Newcastle and Pasquale Caracciolo, for example, praised the outstanding qualities of the Neapolitan horse. It is not believed that the ancestors of the Neapolitan horses are only Spanish horses. The different breedings have influenced each other. The last Neapolitan stud books are from around 1900. The selection of the horses was a challenge, Giuseppe Maresca told me. Nobody knew exactly what the Neapolitan horses really looked like. Were the old paintings faithful illustrations, or were they artistically exaggerated? But in fact, Giuseppe Maresca's mares gave birth to foals that looked exactly like the horses on the historical engravings. Characteristics of the breed are the expressive heads, the curved necks, and especially the construction of the shoulder and the front leg. The earlier Neapolitans were easy to collect, and they had speed and endurance too. The young horses I saw in Piano di Sorrento were between 1,55 m and 1,65 m high and looked like horses from a warm-blood association. My idea of horses that look like PREs or Lusitanos proved to be incorrect. Dark bay is the dominant color, and everyone will take notice of the big, intelligent black eyes. It was remarkable that the young and untrained horses had a very good top line and were very well muzzled. The back was rather short, the legs and hoofs, again remarkable, very correct. So Grisone's description also fits the new Neapolitan horse. At the end of the chapter about characteristics and anatomy, Federico Grisone points out that even the horse with the best talents needs training and education. This is the only way the hidden virtues come to light. The opposite is also possible. Wrong training ruins the best horse. We find this in Book 1 on page 9, and it sounds like this. Et non pensiate che il cavallo, benché sia bene dalla natura, senza il soccorso umano e vera dottrina. The trot is, in Grisone's opinion, the most important pace to train the horse. If the horse trots correctly, it will improve walk and canter, and the horse has more power for the airs above the ground. Another result is a good and soft contact with the horse's mouth, called appoggio, which must be the basis for each training. The Italian word appoggio is still used today, Literally, it means support. And isn't it what a good connection is supposed to be? The first time the horse is ridden, this happens with a cover song only. After a few small steps forward, the rider should stop and pat it. But in the next sentence, Grisone recommends the reader to rigorously punish his horse if it refuses to stand close to the mountain block. Non si volesse avvicinare al poggio per farsi cavalcare. Libro primo, page 10. But the rider should not hit the eyes of the horse with his whip. Another kind of punishment could be to let the horse step backwards very quickly. From today's point of view, harsh punishment in the initial phase of training seems very strange to us. But we must imagine the consequences of disobedience in the 16th century. A man's reputation depended a lot on his riding skills. Not to get on the horse was a huge disgrace, quite apart from the fact that a very long distance might be covered on foot. If the horse does not want to follow the forward pulling rope, for example when it should go into a trailer, still many horsemanship trainers let the horse step backwards quickly. According to Federico Grisone's teaching, the horse doesn't get used to the bit until it knows and reacts to the rider's aids. So only after it has been trained on circles, the rings, for some time. The straight line between those rings is called Repoloni. We find a drawing of the Repoloni and the rings in the original book. You see a straight line with a figure of 8 at the end. According to the motto not to take the second step first, the number of rings is to be gradually increased after a certain foundation has been laid. With more experienced horses, the exercise on the Repoloni was to lengthen the strides, to stop at the end, and to show the posate or the volta or a combination of both. We will explain these exercises later. In her book, Rules of Riding, Listobi writes that the old Italian unit of measurement, palmo, corresponds to 26 centimeters. Grisone demanded 250 palmo for one circumference. If you convert the size back to meters, it is about 65. That is, the diameter is about 20 meters. And this is more or less the size of the circle that is still ridden today. Federico Grisone repeats that the gradual increase in requirements is very important. He clearly describes time and number of the rings required, but does not promote a very strict scheme. Instead, he advises the rider to listen to his feeling and experience and to observe the level of development of the horse well. E conoscerete che senza debilitarsi vi possa resistere. Libro primo, page 15. He also mentions more than one time the importance of a good surface. Grisone is often accused of having ridden horses in deep and uneven fields. But think twice before you judge. In Germany, England, and other European countries, the fields are much more humid, they are deeper and muddier than the fields around Naples. The ground, close to the Vesuvius, is rather dry and stony. In this area, a freshly plowed field is something totally different, and we think it was something comfortable for the horses. Again and again, Grisone asks the rider to pat, caress, and praise the horse with his voice after a stronger aid. He advises the rider to dismount after the exercise and let the horse be led into the stable. He makes a clear distinction between aids of weight, leg, and rein. In almost every exercise, the rider should use his voice in different ways. The horse should be accustomed to spurs at early age to ensure that it understands these. A rather crude suggestion for correction relates to horses that have become vicious due to incorrect work. Our position to the very drastic punishments and correction methods is clear. They are not to be condoned and should in no way be trivialized. Of course, one should not apply the teachings of Grisone's book to today's riding practice. Rather, one should see it as a unique historical document that it is, and not disregard the preconditions of the time when assessing it. Between the lines, we read and felt that Federico Grisone must have been a great and passionate horseman and a horse-loving person. He would certainly know how to use other formulations nowadays and would refrain from the extreme suggestions for correction. We think it is not appropriate to reduce him to the founder of a school of violence. Like in the game Chinese Whisper or politically more correct Broken Telephone, it is sometimes very surprising what comes out in the end. Changes to the original content were caused by translators' mistakes, printing errors, different personal interpretation, and certainly personal motives as well. Toward the end of the first book, Grisone describes how to present a horse skillfully to a prince or regent. He recommends a location from which the spectator has the best view and yet is not exposed to danger. The order of the exercises and the required precision reminds one already of a dressage test. The horse should be shown from each side, and also the turns should be ridden to the left and to the right. The number of the straight lines, repoloni, and the difficulty of the turns depends on the horse's physical condition and level of training. The rider would know best himself which training intensity is appropriate. Libro Secondo, second book. In his second book, Federico Grisone emphasizes how important it is that the horse is balanced in all gaits and turns. He describes possible mistakes and how to correct them. He attaches great importance to keeping the path correctly, and changes of direction should be done consciously. He often reminds his reader of advice already given with words like "come vo detto," like I told you. Horses that offer the required turns at the end of a straight line, the repoloni, almost on their own, should only be given soft aids. It would be bad to give aids with the spurs, and it will be enough just to click your tongue and maybe help with your calf, Grisone writes. He further advises to train rather rarely in canter, and warns against the misconception that the horse would become stronger and faster by long, fast canter. Grisone recalls his own trainer, Nicola Pagano, who did not let the horse gallop at all in the first year of training. And he warns against asking double turns at the end of the repoloni if the horse does not have the necessary strength. Even if the horse could be made to do this by a skilled rider, the quality of execution would not be good. And if it came to another, less practiced and experienced rider, the horse would not even do the simple turns. So the author already differentiated between professional and amateur, and it was important to him that the horses trained by a professional could be ridden by an amateur. Here an original quotation. Appresso cambiando mano e vivendo in poter di un cavaliero non così ben esperto, non farebbe giuste secondo ricerca le volte sempre dei repoloni. Even today, professional riders have demanding clients, and it would not have been easier for professional trainers back then. It was important that none of the noble clients came to harm or gave a bad impression in the saddle because a horse was not trained well enough. More detailed than in his first book, Grisone explains how to teach a horse the posate and what to pay particular attention to in the single and double turns. The posate, called possata in Johann Feiser's German translation, means that the horse performs something that today most likely is called pesade. The horse rises on its hind legs and bends the front legs evenly. It remains at the aids of the rider, who can begin and end this exercise in a controlled manner. The connection between the rider's hand and the horse's mouth also remains constant. The posate has nothing in common with rearing, even if the handles are not yet bent under the horse's body like in the levade, which the riders at the Vienna riding school perform in their shows. Furthermore, Grisone tells his reader exactly how the workload is gradually increased. To build up more strength and endurance, he advises to train on an incline for about 10 days. He also recommends frequent riding in the water to get the horses to lift their front legs nicely. Hello, Renaissance aqua trainer. Another quotation. E per far che egli lievi bene le braccia e le spalle, non poco li giovera farlo spesso andar di trotto dell'acqua, in alcun fiume o rivero in mare. Literally about, and to make his arms and shoulders light, it helps to trot him often in the water, in a river or in the sea. The author considers it very important that the horse is accustomed to the spurs at young age and learns to understand the aids given with them. Before his time, it was often common to apply the spurs when the horse has been in training for some time. Due to lack of understanding, the horses reacted disobediently and fought back. In Grisone's opinion, the rider should use the spurs with moderation so that the horse understands the forward-pushing aids correctly and is not provoked to resist. To prevent dullness, the rider should use his voice whenever possible, and for this purpose use different commands and sounds depending on the occasion. These commands given at the appropriate time must always be the same. There's a detailed description how to make a clicking sound with the tongue. Translate it freely. Place the tip of your tongue approximately in the middle of your palate, and at the moment it turns out and snaps the inside of your mouth, you make a certain sound which will be wonderful to help your horse. If the horse strikes the back of its forefeet with the hind feet, training on an uphill slope, walked several days in a row, can improve that fault. If the horse is very lazy, does not react to the spurs, and does not like to do the double turns, the rider should do the following. He should go into the turn with the greatest possible speed on a narrow course or also in the cross country, and use his spurs without hesitation, no matter if the horse starts to bleed. The next day the horse should be ridden only a little. After punishment or stronger aids, Grisone demands to stop immediately with rough treatment if the horse reacts as desired. Freely translated quotation. Immediately after you have corrected his misbehavior, you should pat him on the neck with the intention of parting on good terms, so that the horse ends the training session with a positive impression. In order to make it easier for those who want to read the books in the original, we would like to explain a few terms. In Elizabeth Toby's modern translation, the word for maneggiare is to manage, and it means to train or to ride the horse. Pfizer wrote tummeln instead of maneggiare, and in the German dictionary, tummeln is to move lively, to hurry. In the Netherlands or Belgium, manege is a common expression for an indoor riding arena, the place where the horse is trained. So maneggiare is a verb for what you are doing in the manege. Another word that appears very often is volta, and those voltas have only a limited connection with our modern circles. It can mean a circle, but more often it is about turns or double turns, which remind of pirouettes. These turns can be required from the horse in all gaits. We think maybe the turns have been similar to the turns in the Doma Vaquera. As the fast, tight and yet balanced turns were essential for show fights and real battles with the enemy, demonstration of horsemanship skills, and for general riding comfort, great emphasis was put on the quality of the various turns in training. Moreover, the whole thing should look elegant and effortless. Parallels between the choreographies of ballet and courtly equestrian performances are no coincidence. For horses that always make the turns too big, Grisone recommends to practice along a wall. Even today, trainers like to use the fencing of the arena or a wall to teach young horses or students the sideward pushing aids. In Grand Prix freestyle competitions, you can observe that some riders show pirouettes and canter close to the rails because there the horse takes back its own weight and is easier to collect. Grisone writes that a secure connection is essential for the turns, and there is no doubt that a nicely bent neck with even head carriage and a good activity of the horse's mouth are necessary and basis of every virtue. Original quotation. E perché non è dubbio che per aver il fondamento di ogni virtù bisogna che il cavallo sia fermo di arco, di collo, di testa e abbia buona bocca. Libro secondo, page 59. The next section is highly interesting and timeless. Another original quotation. Mi pare sopradicio ch'io sia costretto farvi noto che vogliate fuggire il disordine che molti usano, che mutando tante aspre e varie briglie al cavallo, pensano con quelle fermarlo di capo al tenere abilitarlo e non si avvedono, con esse si infelice veramente si esaspera, onde con si grave errore non sarà mai possibile, alla qual si possa temperamento appoggiare e assicurar la bocca. Translated freely. It seems to me that I must tell you to avoid what many are doing, to use many hard bridles for the horse. Some people think they can easily control the horse with it and don't realize that it upsets the horse a lot. So it's a grave error and makes it impossible to achieve ultimate perfection. Instead, with good art, true discipline, and a comfortable bridle, the horse is enabled to have a steady contact and a constant connection. Sounds like good riding is enough, doesn't it? On the next pages of the second book, Grisone goes into more detail about the horse's mouth and describes the effect of bits and curb chains. He explains how to recognize an already damaged mouth and what the consequences are. If the horse's curb is damaged or injured, it is best to ride without a curb chain. Later, a finger-wide band can be used instead of a curb chain. Libro secondo ends with the announcement that he will explain the most common bits and their impact. He will limit himself to what he considers relevant bridles and leave the others to the vulgar and uncultivated people without further mention. He will also tell the reader many good remedies that can solve many problems. Libro terzo, third book. In the original edition, there are 50 illustrations with different bits. Compared to what is allowed today in modern dressage, they look quite harsh. All these bits are leverage bits with a curb chain. The shanks may appear long to dressage riders, but if you look at the bits used in the doma vaquera, western riding or carriage driving, not to forget modern jumping competitions, we find many similarities. 17 bits have 2 pieces, others have hinged joints, some are in one piece with a higher port. Often you see little pendants in the middle of the port. They should promote chewing activity. Usually there is a small chain between the shanks above the mouthpiece. This chain, sometimes with little rings or rolls, should prevent the horse from becoming heavy in the hand. The total volume of metal in the horse's mouth was not more than today when a double bridle is used. Because of the length of the shanks, it was necessary to connect them, as it is done with the shanks of a hackamore. For sure, the bits were harsh, and due to the way they were made, injuries could easily happen. Today, of course, you would no longer use something like that. When fighting from horseback, the rider's life depended on the animal's controllability. Harsh and sharp bits existed long before Grisone's time. Many pictures bear witness to this. In the exhibition of the Horse Museum Verden, we find a very massive model from 1520. The historical museum Feste Coburg also has many examples. On pictures and paintings from the time before Grisone's birth, horses are very often depicted with open mouths and equipped with harsh leverage bits. A very well-known engraving is by Albrecht Dürer from 1508, and it shows St. George on horseback. It can easily be found on the internet. The horse of St. George has a bridle without noseband. The mouthpiece has very long shanks, and the reins consist of a solid chain that is attached to the lower ring of the shanks. Another rein runs from the rider's hand through the mouthpiece and is connected to the cheek piece. This transfers pressure to the horse's neck. It seems to have been common practice to buckle the bit much lower than today. Nosebands are rarely seen. Warfare or real fighting from horseback was gradually becoming a thing of the past, yet jousting was still taken very seriously. In addition to the rider's reputation, his health was also at stake. There are colorful tournament books from the 16th century in which victors and vanquished are depicted in their magnificent armor for posterity. In dressage competitions, an unruly horse will be graded poorly. In jumping sport, loss of control due to lack of influence can lead to serious accidents. Especially in the international sport, jumping riders show a lot of creativity. Sometimes the mouthpieces of their horses look as martial as those of the medieval knights. The illustrations of the mouthpieces that are included in Pfizer's German translation of Gli ordini di cavalcare have only distant similarity to those of the original. Immediately it is noticeable that Pfizer has embedded them in the text of his fourth book, and also that they appear much more massive and edgy. Details such as joints, the closures, and the curb chain, and especially the inscription, have been seriously changed. In the original, we only find the names for the respective mouthpiece on the illustrations. For example, original, melon bit with 2 small rings on each side of the mouthpiece. Pfizer, for horses with a stubborn mouth, or for horses of very wicked nature. In Pfizer's book, pictorial overlays make it difficult for the viewer to get a concrete idea of the respective mouthpiece. Grisone recommends for young horses as first bridle the so-called Kanone mouthpiece. The first of the 50 illustrations in the original shows it. Below is written, "Che sia por canone, la prima briglia al cavallo." Other bits, like the bastonet and the castagna, also depicted in great detail, he shows because he strongly advises against them. The reasoning sounds understandable. If the horse finds a bit uncomfortable from the start and rejects it, it will always resist and be distracted by head shaking or other misbehaviors. The horse will be preoccupied with itself instead of concentrating on the rider's aids, and for this reason will never understand the will of the rider. Grisone also says that the most training deficiencies can be fixed without many different mouthpieces. In his words, "Pero è da notarsi, mirlibilmente ogni cavallo si potrà, il più delle volte correggere di qualsivoglia difetto di bocca, senza usar tanti morsi ma solo con le arte e con queste 3 qualità di briglie." The bit should lie in the mouth so that it does not touch the canine teeth. The author considers the nose bend to be useful. Another freely translated quotation. And I will not answer those who criticize the nose bend because their criticism lies in their limited experience. It is enough to end this discourse here. You can see that even the Renaissance dressage scene did not always agree. A good contact is very important to Grisone, and he shows many examples how typical errors can be corrected. Whether the horse is stiff on one side, pulls up the tongue, or twists his poll, always the rider should use his legs and spurs to improve the contact. Like trainers today, he asks the horse to step forward to the bit. The way he explains clearly shows that he was aware of the horse's crookedness and that he had recognized the value of exercises to straighten the horse. He also describes what we call outside aids or diagonal aids. Federico Grisone asks the rider to concentrate on his horse. He should pay attention to the horse's ears and react in time if the horse raises one or both ears. It is important to get the horse's attention back before it resists the rider's aids or starts fighting with other horses. The horse will only be trained for lasting obedience if the rider is consistent with punishments and does not forget to praise when the horse is doing well. Horses that turn badly in general or on one side can be corrected with help of men on the ground. It is important that these men have as much experience as the rider in the saddle, Grisone writes. When working with young horses, the experience of the man on the ground is of even greater advantage. An interesting and wise comment, we think. In order to increase the sideways effect of the bridle, the author mentions knots sewn into the bridle or small metal plates or spikes. But he warns against the misconception that these means alone will lead to success. An expert would be able to solve all these problems by continuous training according to the principles of the Gli Ordini di Cavalcare. Towards the end of Libro Terzo, page 87, we find the section with a wild cat. Unfortunately, the author is often reduced to this part. It is about correcting a horse that stubbornly resists the forward-pushing aid. Even if we reproduce the passage literally, we still take it out of the context. Grisone expressly prefaces the request to find a wild cat and tie it belly up to a stick with the fact that the rider should only do this in the greatest need. And if he does not have the time and the training needed to convince the horse to change its behavior. The idea is not complicated. Instead of helping with the whip, the man on the ground holds a scratching, snarling, screaming animal behind the horse. He might even let it touch the horse. The natural instinct to flee will be awakened. Another riding master from Naples, called Messer Respino, who used a similar method with a small porcupine, agreed with Grisone that the horse could be made to move forward this way. But he also said that this would be of very little value if the mouth was not also put in order. In other words, there's no use being fast if you're not able to slow down or if you don't have a brake. Going through or responding to the rider's forward-pushing aids are two different things. At the end of this section, Federico Grisone writes that it is quite possible to achieve success with such methods, but that they are very uncertain and it is better not to rely on them. In most cases, the horse would go crazy and desperate and would not understand what it should do. But Grisone considers it necessary that the rider knows such methods. In the end, only following the principles he has already taught his readers will lead to lasting success. He promises to present other valuable techniques that have more substance than punitive methods with unreliable results. Whether a horse tends to lie down in the water cannot be predicted with certainty from the hair swirls, nor would all horses born under the zodiac sign of Leo show this behavior. In the end, one would only know for sure when the horse really lies down in the water. If something like this happened, in the worst case with a noble or even royal rider in the saddle, then the riding instructor had a problem, a big problem. Therefore, such a tendency had to be stopped at all costs. For this purpose, an attendant should sit on the horse. As soon as a horse starts to lie down, the group of helpers standing by should try to keep the horse on the ground and push his head into the water. In this position it is held for a while. When it has risen, it is to be driven out of the water by driving and slapping it with a whip. When the horse has left the water, the slaps must be stopped immediately. We wondered why at least some horses had a strong desire to lie down in the water. Today, many riders already have a problem when there are puddles in the riding arena. Horses rolling in the water are more likely associated with bathing lakes, ponies and children. This behavior could be explained by the significantly warmer climate, heavy sweating when being ridden, and annoyance caused by biting insects. The water promised refreshment and relief, and with a little respected person on its back, the horse's desire to roll easily gained the upper hand over obedience. If you want to correct horses which have the habit of going through, you have to be just as attentive and focused as when working with a youngster, Grisone writes. Help from the ground can be useful, but a rider proceeding according to the rules described would be able to solve this problem without help from the ground. First, the horse should learn to stop from the walk, then from the trot, and then it should learn to make the posate. Nowadays we would say to improve rideability with basic exercises and develop more strength to carry weight with the hind legs. Under no circumstances the horse should be ridden in a fast gallop. The author considers it very wrong to tire a horse that tends to bolt by galloping for a long time. Tendons and joints would be damaged this way. Moreover, the effect would not last long. If a sharper mouthpiece is used temporarily, the rider should switch back to a softer one after a while. Federico Grisone ends Libro Terzo with an admonition to the riders not to neglect the basic training in the rings and to always use the whip in such a way that the horse does not fear it. To those who doubt the intelligence of horses, he counters that horses were created by God to serve humans and therefore unsurprisingly endowed with the perspectiveness necessary for learning. And everyone could see the proof that horses would provide again and again through their loyalty, fearlessness and willingness to perform. Libro Quarto, fourth book. Right at the beginning of his fourth book, Grisone describes how to train horses to make them courageous and fearless. These qualities were indispensable for real battles and show fights. The rider is to ride his horse towards men standing on the ground, who take the role of attackers. The men are supposed to make threatening and dangerous gestures. The more courageously the horse approaches them, the more these attackers have to retreat. The praise afterwards is immensely important to give the horse security and confidence. If the horse shows no fear, the supposed attackers can reinforce the threatening situation by shouting and seeming to attack with a sword. This would make the horse even more self-confident. Riding directly towards each other and riding close to each other must be included in the training on the rings. We wondered how many riders practice this intensively before they compete for the first time with their young horses. If you observe the warm-up arena, certainly not all of them. If a horse resists due to inexperience or fear, the rider should never punish it. This would only increase the insecurity. Obedience to the forward-pushing aids during the confrontation with a frightening situation must always be rewarded. Federico Grisone recommends to take fearful horses often to unusual places and to visit busy streets and markets. In addition, one should often ride at night. Original quotation: Per li mercati, per le piazze, per li fari e caldari. Libro quarto, page 96. Another trick for very spooky horses is to attach a small pinwheel, like the ones children used to play with, to the bridle. Also page 96. Porli un ventarello nella fronte. In our horse world today, we know the methods of dosed scaring, desensitization, and positive reinforcement. Or should we say, this type of training has been rediscovered? The horse should not give in to his natural instinct to flee. Instead, it has to learn to trust the rider and listen to his aids even in threatening situations. Good training can turn a nervous and fearful horse into a calm, fearless and trusting partner. A horse does not necessarily have to perform the capriole. Just as little as the rider needs to be skillful in playing with a ball. But there is no question that the rider who practices playing ball becomes fitter, more agile and more nimble. For the horse, the capriole has the same effect. Furthermore, this exercise can be useful in combats. We always found such comparisons fascinating. Don't forget, Grisone wrote his book almost 500 years ago. Grisone describes the capriole as it is still performed today. The word capriole, Italian, literally somersault, by the way, comes from the Latin word capra, that means goat. And everyone knows what kind of leaps goats are able to make. The horse jumps in the air with evenly bent legs, high enough to strike out with both hind legs in the middle of the leap. The landing on the ground afterwards must be in good balance. It should be noted that the horse must already be well trained and its lumbar muscles must be sufficiently strong to make the performance look easy, Grisone writes. With a strong impulse from the handles, beautifully bent front legs, and above all, with soft and discreet aids from its rider. Next, he explains an exercise that can be taught in the stable. That exercise should teach the horse to lift his legs higher and more elegant in the turns of the gambetta. You need two assistants. One touches the horse with a whip on the side where the rider normally uses his spurs. The other one touches the opposite front leg at the same time. When the horse lifts the leg, he makes sure that it keeps the front leg bent and lifted and that it stays in that position for a while. As soon as a horse understands and reacts correctly, it must be praised. The horse should enjoy the gambetta. Next, Federico Grisone writes about the effect of the spurs, which, like the power of the sun, can have different effects on different materials. One material would melt, the other one would harden. It can be seen from the context what he means. You can push a horse more forward to get more contact, to make the horse step forward to the bit. Then you have more contact between the rider's hand and the horse's mouth. But the aids with the spurs can also lead to more engaged hind legs, which are then more used for carrying than for pushing forward. Then, due to the improved self-carriage, the rider has a softer and lighter contact to the horse's mouth. If the horse is often too light in the hand and with his nose line behind the vertical, a cloth-wrapped curb chain can help. The improved contact gives the horse a more elegant appearance, it becomes straighter and builds up more muscles. The author adds that the less spurs and whip are used, the calmer the horse's tail will be. The art of riding would be to make the horse understand the reasons for the rider's aids. If the horse understands these reasons, it would easily fulfill all the rider's desires. Federico Grisone strives for an ideal almost as we know it in Germany from our guidelines, the Richtlinien für Reiten und Fahren. The goal is the greatest possible harmony between horse and rider. About 500 years ago, it sounded like this. E alla vista di riguardanti parera che egli e voi sia un solo corpo di un senso e di una voluta. Translated freely, it appears to the viewer that you and he are one body of one mind and one will. Libro Quarto, page 107. Even in the 16th century, there were apparently discussions about the position of the horse's head and neck. In the last part of Libro Quarto, Grisone once again clearly speaks out in favor of a constant connection between the rider's hand and the horse's mouth, and also explains why the forehead line should be slightly behind rather than too much in front of the vertical. If the neck is too free, the horse will run on the forehand and the back is hollow. There is also a disadvantage in having the mouth ahead as the weakest part of the body. Riding with a good and constant connection would strengthen the back, provide lightness, more strength, and strong loin muscles. Federico Grisone then gives even more detailed instructions on the rider's hand position than in the previous parts of his work, and proceeds with some remarks on the rider's behavior when mounting. The rider should especially check that the curb chain is in the correct position and that the girth is tightened. After mounting, the horse should remain standing for a while so that the rider can sort out his reins and clothing. In Grisone's view, the reasons for not riding permanently with a high hand are endless, and he names just a few of them. The arms tire more quickly, the rider's center of gravity is higher and makes a balanced seat more difficult. Furthermore, holding the reins with a very high hand makes it much easier for enemies to cut the reins. Even if the rider seems to be successful, the high-positioned hand is naturally more unsteady. This makes an unstable contact and causes an unsteady posture of the horse's head and neck. Speaking of the hand, we or our instructors also often like to talk about the hand. We say, the rider has a sensitive hand, the rider has a hard, unforgiving hand, and so on. Let us not forget that Grisone really spoke of one hand. Both reins were held exclusively in the left hand, not only to perform a task particularly impressive, but as a matter of principle. The right hand was used to hold the sword or the whip, which was not used to beat the horse all the time. The calm and skillful holding of the whip was evidence of the rider's skills. The rider carried the whip instead of a sword. The horse must not be afraid of either the sword or the whip. In contrast to the horses trained according to the guidelines of the Ordini di Cavalcade, the Arabs would ride their horses without a constant contact between the rider's hand and the horse's mouth and would let them run without restraint. In lance fighting, the disadvantages of this riding style were not yet as noticeable as in man-to-man combat, where tight turning was indispensable. Because the Arabs would not know how to train systematically, they would train their horses by frequent and rapid galloping, and they would also put weights on them. From the age of 2, the horses would be weighted with sandbags in the stable. During the day, the horses would stand in the stable with a load that would be gradually increased until the weight of an adult armed man was reached. Grisone advises to start training the horse according to the principles he describes from the age of about 3 to 3.5. He refers to the Roman-German emperor and king of Sicily, Federico II, who was a great horse expert and did not put young horses to work until they were 4 years old. Federico Grisone recommends in the beginning not to change the location where the horse is trained. But with very fearful horses, however, this is exactly what is advisable. This is not a contradiction. Especially fearful or oversensitive horses have to be accustomed to many different situations. And if an experienced rider gives the horse security, it will trust him and gradually develop more self-confidence. At first, the horse should be ridden on the rings for about 1 hour a day. Later, it is sufficient to practice every 3rd day or even only twice a week. However, this only applies if the longer breaks do not make the horse lazy or disobedient. The rider must always remember that there are horses that can be taught everything at an early age, but horses will never reach full strength and power until they have completely changed their teeth. In the age of 6 to 15, horses are generally at their best. With good training, care, and without major injuries, their use up to the age of 20 is not uncommon. Federico Grisone reports 2 episodes that show that older horses were not only appreciated by him. He writes that in the Battle of Fornovo, Charles VIII entrusted his life to a 20-year-old bay horse with no pedigree who was also blind on one eye. However, this horse showed unimaginable courage and great commitment in battle. After this admirable achievement, Grisone writes, that horse had to do no more work for the rest of its life. The king's sister took care of the animal until its death. The other incident is said to have occurred when a Neapolitan nobleman wanted to support the Viceroy of France in a battle against the Spanish army. As he had no horse, he generously received permission from the Prince of Melfi to choose one of the best horses from his stable. The Neapolitan nobleman chose a 27-year-old horse that had stood mostly at the stud farm and insisted on his decision. Several attempts to convince him to take a younger horse failed. In the battle, the 27-year-old horse, although it was wounded, was so outstanding, quotation, that the names of horse and rider deserve to triumph in the world and in the fifth sphere. Libro Quarto, page 112. Original: El altro deni che ora il nome loro trionfante sia nel mondo e nella quinta sfera. Federico Grisone's closing words loosely translated. Here the rules of horsemanship end. Although there are still many secrets to be told, it is my need to omit them so as not to confuse you. If I had told you, you might have misunderstood. That's why I'm only saying them now. If you have the intention of being a perfect rider, you must by nature not only be under the influence of Mars, but you must also think continuously in this principle. Moreover, by practical experience and practice of my teachings, you will understand many things which I omit here. And I hope that all these other things may be clear to you through our gracious God, who is always gracious to those who serve and seek and deserve His grace. However, this grace is very rarely given, and in all other arts you can find a greater number of experts. But here the difficulty is such that hardly anyone achieves perfection. Il fine, the end. On the historical city map of Naples from 1727, original by Johann Baptiste Hohmann from Nuremberg, Federico Grisone's academy can still be found. The square building bears the number 82 and at the top of the map, Cavallerizza Reale is assigned. Anyone who comes to Naples can find the striking building with the massive walls that used to be the Royal Riding School on Via Amerigo Vespucci. It is not easy to get inside because a state authority is now housed there, but you can catch a glimpse of the green courtyard from the entrance. When you stand in front of the building and you close your eyes, you can imagine the clatter of hoofs as the nobles, I nobili, in the saddle of their elegant horses, passed through the archway and left the ground of the academy. In Grisone's living days, the view of the harbor was unobstructed and one could easily reach nearby fields on horseback, as described in Gli Ordini di Cavalcare. Our Italian expert on the hippological stories around Naples, Giuseppe Maresca, knows from his studies of historical writings and illustrations that the quay wall of the harbor was adorned by two larger-than-life horses that were visible far across the sea. For several hundred years, the Neapolitan horse was a symbol of its homeland. Today, one hardly sees horses or animals at all in Naples and in the surrounding area of the metropolis. The city, as fascinating as it undeniably is, should remind us horse lovers how quickly a formative part of life and history is irretrievably lost, and in the end disappears without a trace. Only if we all contribute together, we will win new horse lovers for the future. In Gli Ordini di Cavalcare, historical roots of almost every branch of equestrianism can be found. Let's learn to draw fewer dividing lines between our different disciplines. Let's work together, to ensure that horses keep their place in our society, not as exotic zoo animals, but as our fellow creatures, as our friends and sports partners. Horses are more closely linked to our human history than any other domestic animal. Let us prove ourselves worthy of this friendship dating back thousands of years.